Well guys, imagine this picture. You come home from work, an ordinary evening, nothing special. You kicked off your shoes at the door, went into the kitchen, saw your wife doing something, everything seems to be as usual. Except that you automatically pick up her phone to check what time it is. Yes, that's how my wife and I exchange gadgets, always close by, everything at hand. And then, a random photo. Yeah, that's how it starts. A snapshot. Well, it would seem, what's the big deal? Valerie is sitting in a cafe with some dude, both smiling, cups of coffee, the atmosphere is so, relaxed. But there's something about that photo that just hooked me right away. The person you've been living with for years suddenly looks different in the photo, the smile is very familiar, but not to me. Immediately suspicions crept in, what kind of a man is this, and in general, why suddenly such meetings behind my back?
Thank you for watching my channel. I create videos for your enjoyment. Please subscribe if you want to support my efforts, it's very important to me. I apologize in advance for any mistakes, dubbing is done by neural network. Please point out mistakes in the comments so I can correct them.
Guys, this is where it gets interesting. Well, you've probably heard that the first instinct is to make a mess. Grab the phone, organize an interrogation, break a couple of mugs, all in the best traditions of family scandals. But I decided to go the other way. Calm, no hysterics. I'm a lousy detective, but when you're really hooked, you start gathering information like a real Sherlock. The age of technology is on my side. What do? We get into messengers, of course. But carefully, not in a way she'll suspect. It's all about taking your time. You know what the funny thing is? She wasn't even hiding. Valerie must have thought I was blind or stupid. I open the messenger, nothing at first. How are you? When will you be back? The standard stuff. But there's one name that comes up more often than any other. And the messages with this dude are clearly not about shopping or work. I scroll further, and that's where it gets interesting. It seems like ordinary conversations, but underneath the text you can sense something more. There are some phrases that seem harmless at first glance, but something clicks inside you. Like, will you meet me where you were yesterday? And that's when my blood boiled. Where did they meet yesterday, I wonder? They weren't at our house, and she doesn't have one at work. All right, I guess I'll wait a little longer. But inside it felt like a bucket of cold water. But I wasn't gonna show her that I knew. Let her think I was still the same simpleton. Honestly, I was hoping it was just a misunderstanding. That she was just friends, that it was just a casual conversation. But my brain was already working in the other direction. If there's smoke, there must be fire somewhere. And that's when I started gathering information. It wasn't enough just to read the correspondence. I had to make sure it was what I thought it was. The next step is, of course, her phone when she can't see it. I'll be honest, I was already feeling a little paranoid at that point, but who could resist? I found a couple of pictures, not like in the movies where it's all straight up. No, it's more veiled. Cafes, dinners, cute selfies. But this guy in the pictures was a frequent visitor to her gallery. And here's the interesting thing, she didn't delete the pictures with him, as if she thought I'd never see them. I don't know, maybe she was playing me for a fool. It started to dawn on me that it wasn't just friendship. Every new picture, every little detail was starting to add up to one very unpleasant picture. And that's what I decided, revenge. Just talking wasn't enough. I knew I wasn't going to get a divorce or make a show of it. I wanted to make her life hell. Let her see what it's like to play behind my back. Let's be honest, men, when you find out your wife is cheating on you, the first thing that comes to mind is to hit harder. First it's anger, then despair, and then the thought creeps into your head, why not get even? Make him feel the way I feel. Except my revenge would have to be subtle. I wanted her to fall into the trap she'd dug for herself. The first thing I did was to put on an act for her. An unsuspecting husband was the best cover. But inside, I knew I had to figure out how to make sure she couldn't get away from me. And then I came up with the idea of the photo she'd stupidly left on her phone. Oh, my dear Valerie, you don't realize the trap you've put yourself in. This photo will be the key to my revenge. I made a copy of this photo and hid it in the cloud so that it could not be deleted or hidden. From that moment on, it became my trump card. And that's where the real game began. I wasn't going to use it right away, oh no. I was going to wait until the moment was right. Like in chess, you wait for your opponent to make a move and then checkmate him. But I wasn't so simple as to just send a photo of her to her friends or coworkers. No, my revenge had to be slow and agonizing. I started with the little things, controlling her every move, every meeting, making up all sorts of excuses for her to abandon her plans. Make her feel like she was in a cage. And the more I watched her try to get out of it, the more I liked it. I said to myself, this is just the beginning, Valerie. You don't know yet how hard I can pin you down. Her smile, of course, was fake, as if someone had pulled an invisible string sharply and it was about to burst. But I continued to hold my line. Well, we'll see, I said casually, and went back to my tea, pretending that I didn't pay any attention to the conversation. But I could feel everything boiling up inside. Every look, every word, every movement seemed fake to me now, made up only to cover her secrets. I knew I had to wait for the right moment. Threats, yelling it was too easy. I wanted Valerie to fall into the trap she'd dug for herself. I wanted her to feel the ground slipping away from under her feet while I stood by, watching and doing nothing. I waited for her to get nervous, for her lies to become too obvious even for her. And then one night she said she was going out with her friends again. So, as the caring husband I am, I offered to give her a ride in the car. You know what she said? No need, it's not far. Nothing suspicious, but that tone, that barely perceptible tension in her voice, it immediately made me realize that she was lying. And that's when I decided it was time to move on to the next phase of my plan. After waiting a couple minutes, I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door. Not to say that I became a professional detective, but believe me, with a small salary in a town like this you don't have much entertainment, and adventures like this can sometimes be the best show of your life. And what do you think? Valerie, of course, did not go to her friends. She wasn't very good at hiding. She was walking so important, beautiful, confident, and I was literally a few steps behind her. And then I see her turning into the same cafe where I had already seen her in that random photo. My heart raced so hard that for a second I thought I was going to collapse in the middle of the street. But no, the adrenaline did its job and I kept watching. She goes inside, and I watch through the window. Sits down at a table, and sure enough, the dude in the picture walks up to her. Smiling, laughing, she whispers something in his ear. That's when it hit me. I wanted to burst in there and make a scandal for the whole restaurant, but I held back. No, not the time. It would be too easy. I returned home, where another important step awaited me. You know, guys, it's times like this that you realize revenge is a delicate thing. You can't get emotional. You gotta be cold, calculating. So I sat down on the couch and started thinking about how to use what I'd learned. I had a card in my hand that could ruin her life, and I was ready to play it. And then an idea came to me. I'd been copying her messages, her photos for a while now, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. I needed more dirt than that. I started thinking about how to set her up so she couldn't even suspect I'd started the war. And that's when the plan came together. My plan was simple but effective. I wasn't going to lay all my cards on the table. No, I wanted Valerie to start feeling her life spinning out of control. First of all, I made her begin to question her own caution. Little hints, all of these things were going to start to press her from the inside out. Valerie now lived by my rules. Every move she made was under my watch, every word she spoke was under my crosshairs. She was afraid to even leave the house without my permission, because she knew that any wrong move could be the last one for her reputation. All her confidence, all that ostentatious independence, it was gone. She became a hunted woman who would do anything I said to keep her secret. And me, guys, honestly, I was feeling on top at that moment. That strange feeling of power when you're in control of another person's life. Not that I used to think I could be like that, but circumstances had revealed a dark side in me. At first it was just a plan, a play on nerves, revenge for betrayal. But the further I went, the more I enjoyed the game. And I didn't really do anything special. I just watched her slowly crumble under the weight of my own fear. Then she came to me. She sat across from me with her head down and said quietly, "Sean, I can't take it anymore. Please, let's solve this somehow. I'll do anything, just don't ruin my life." There was pleading, fear and humiliation in her voice. And in that moment I realized, she was finally broken. But I wasn't going to just let her go. No, that would be too easy. I still wanted more. Her request was the beginning of a new phase of my revenge. She was now completely dependent on me, and I could demand anything I wanted. But I wanted her to continue living in this fear, not knowing what would happen next. In fact, it didn't really matter to me how long she tried to hold on. What mattered was that she was under my control. "Do you want me to stop?" I asked, looking intently into her eyes. Valerie nodded, unable to speak. "Then I'll have a few conditions," I continued, feeling the flames of revenge flaring up inside. She looked at me hopefully, as if this conversation might give her back some freedom. The first condition was that she had to account to me for every minute of her life. Where she went, who she talked to, what she did, everything had to go through me. Second, no contact with men, except for work matters, and then only with my approval. 3. She was no longer allowed to go out with her friends unless I said otherwise. Her every action was under my control. And, of course, I wanted more. I loved seeing her submit. It was a kind of revenge for all those years of thinking she had everything under her control. Now she was at my mercy. Valerie acquiesced without complaint. She was willing to do anything as long as I didn't send out that picture. But she had yet to learn that my revenge wouldn't stop there. I was going to go further. After all, now that I had complete control over her life, I could do anything. Now that Valerie was completely under my control, the most interesting part began. Every move she made, every action I took as my victory. My revenge was not to destroy her life at once, but to stretch that pleasure by making her live in constant fear. At first she tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She kept going to work, kept pretending it was business as usual. But her eyes gave it away. This constant fear that I could make a move at any moment that would destroy everything she had built, it was eating her up inside. And that was what I longed for. Every night we had dinner together as if everything was fine. I'd ask her about the day, about her coworkers, but I'd always throw in some little jab, like, "Have you seen that man again?" Or "How are your friends? Haven't heard from them in a while." Valerie flinched, but answered calmly. I could see the terror growing in her eyes though. One day, after a few weeks, I decided it was time to move on. We were sitting in the evening, watching TV, and I suddenly said, "You know, Valerie, I think you deserve a vacation. You work so hard, you're tired. What if you take a week and spend it at home?" At first glance, the suggestion seemed almost caring. But in her eyes I saw understanding. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. She nodded and agreed, realizing she had no choice. And so she stayed home. Every step she took was under my supervision. I checked her phone, monitored her calls, reviewed her correspondence. She couldn't hide anything, and it started to break her even more. Valerie, once independent, confident, was now like a caged bird. But that wasn't enough for me. I knew her fear would peak if she realized she was losing everything, even herself. On the third day of her vacation, I gave her a real test. I came home early, even though she wasn't expecting me so early. I go into the apartment, and what do I see? Valerie sitting in the kitchen, staring out the window, phone next to her. No calls, no communication. It's as if she's locked in her own thoughts, and when she sees me, she flinches sharply. "Didn't expect me this early, huh?" I asked, walking over to the refrigerator as if nothing was wrong. She tried again to pretend everything was fine, but I could see her nerves were on edge. So then I took the next step. I went over to her, took the phone off the table, opened it and said, "You know, I was thinking, why don't we call your friend? See how he's doing. Maybe he misses you." Valerie turned pale. She didn't say anything, but I could see that this was a real blow to her. I wasn't going to stop. Every day I thought of new ways to control her, every day I increased my pressure. Now I wasn't just her husband, I was her nightmare that she couldn't escape. And that was my triumph. The pressure grew every day. Valerie was no longer trying to play it cool. There was a tiredness in her eyes and a constant anxiety on her face. She became afraid of my every word, every look, as if she expected something worse to happen. And it was changing her. The Valerie I knew before, as if she no longer existed. She became a shadow, a person who lived in constant panic. I deliberately began to intensify the process. Turned her life into a routine, full of fear and doubt. No more meetings with her friends, no more trips to the city without my knowledge. And then one day, I made a move that finally destroyed her. We were sitting in the evening, eating dinner as usual. Valerie tried not to look up to avoid my gaze. And then, in the most ordinary moment, I decided to make a change. I looked at her and said, You know, Valerie, I was thinking. Why don't you tell me the whole truth? I mean, we've been in this game long enough, so let's do it like a confession. Everything's on the table. She froze. The silence in the room hung so thick you could hear the clock on the wall ticking. I saw the way she clutched her fork, the way her hands tensed. For several long seconds she tried to say something, but her voice trembled. Finally, she exhaled. Sean, I don't know what you want to hear. I already said it was a mistake. I didn't mean anything. You didn't want anything? I grinned, leaning back in my chair. You were sitting in a cafe with another man, laughing, making plans, and now you want to tell me it was just a mistake? You, Valerie, have been in the same room with me for a long time, but it wasn't a mistake. You just thought I'd never find out. She tried to explain something again, but I stopped her. Valerie, let's not have these excuses. Everything you're going to say to me right now is just your pathetic attempt to save what's already ruined. And now that you know I'm in control of everything, it's time to talk terms. I saw her lips quiver, but she remained silent. And then I continued, you will do whatever I say. No questions, no objections. You don't make any more decisions. Forget about your old life. You live by my rules now. And if you ever disobey once, you know what will happen. I saw her eyes fill with tears, but she remained silent, clenching her fists under the table. She had nothing to say. She realized that her life was now completely mine. And I liked that. After that evening, Valerie didn't try to resist anymore. She became obedient, fulfilled all my demands, watched her every step, as if she was afraid to do something wrong. She turned into a woman completely subordinate to me. And that was my triumph. But here's the interesting thing. In that moment, I realized that revenge is not just an act of destruction. It's a way of showing another person that they will never be the same again. Valerie was now in the cage I had created for her. And I knew there was no way for her to get out of that cage. After that night, I finally realized that I had won. Valerie was no longer the woman I had once known. She had become a shadow living under the weight of her own fear and my will. I watched it every day and felt a strange satisfaction. My revenge wasn't instant. It was long, debilitating, and that made it all the more sweet. Every morning Valerie got up like a schedule. She made breakfast as if everything was the same. But I could see fear and despair flickering in her eyes. She was afraid that today I would make another move that would ruin her life for good. But I waited for now. I enjoyed watching her teetering on the edge. Sometimes I would drop hints to her. For example, I might say, I saw your coworker smiling suspiciously at something today. Are you sure he's not aware of it? Or, I think your friends know something. Have you noticed how they look at you strangely? Those words struck at the heart. Valerie was nervous, checking her phone, pretending she had everything under control. But I knew she'd been out of control for a long time. And then one day, I decided it was time to move on. It wasn't enough to keep her afraid anymore. I wanted more. I wanted Valerie to start destroying her own life, with my guidance. That every step she took would be one more step on the road to her downfall. One night I sat across from her on the couch and said, Valerie, I think we need to talk about how you're going to move on with your life. After all, you have to agree, it can't go on like this for much longer. She looked at me in surprise, trying to figure out where I was going with this. You know I could send out that photo at any time, I continued, but I think it's too easy a game. Let's make you start losing what you care about on your own. She froze, not understanding what I meant. For example, I began, you could give up your meetings with your coworkers, voluntarily quit your job. Say, take the blame for something at work, give the impression that you're unserious and unreliable. Let them start to shun you themselves. Her face froze with horror. Are you crazy? She whispered. But I could see that she understood. She had no way out. No, Valerie, I grinned. This is only the beginning. You have to feel like you're losing everything, one step at a time. Otherwise it won't be revenge. From that day on, a new game began. Valerie, as I expected, began to pull away from everything that was important to her. She refused to work, citing stress and health problems. Her friends started avoiding her, not realizing what was going on. And I continued to watch her life crumble under the weight of her own mistakes and my manipulations. My revenge was no longer just a game. It became my raison d'être. I had made her life a living hell, and now she had no way out. Valerie kept rolling downhill, and every step she took only increased my sense of power. She was no longer making her own decisions, and that was fine with me. But deep down, I knew that just getting her to quit her job or refuse to see her friends wasn't the endgame. No, I wanted more than that. I wanted her to destroy everything that was left in her life on her own, to feel like it was her choice, but also realize that I was the one controlling her every move. One night, I struck up the conversation again. Valerie, you do realize that now that you are no longer working, you are completely dependent on me, right? She sat across from me with her head down and remained silent. I knew she had nothing to answer because it was the truth. All these years she had built her independence, her career, and now it was all gone. Her friends had turned their backs on her, her job no longer belonged to her, and I was her only support, but also her biggest threat. You always wanted something more, didn't you? I continued, savoring the situation. You've always dreamed of a beautiful life, of traveling, of being free. But now you're trapped. And you know what the best part is? I can shatter even that illusion at any moment. Valerie raised her eyes full of tears at me. She didn't try to argue, didn't try to fight. She knew I was right. What do you want from me? She finally whispered. And this was the moment I'd been waiting for. I want you to submit. Completely. Without abandon. I want you to do everything I say, without objection and without question. Valerie nodded, as if something inside her had broken completely. She no longer tried to resist. From then on, I was in complete control of her life. I decided when and with whom she could socialize, what she could do, where she could go. It was no longer a life, it was an existence under my control. But even that didn't seem enough to me. There came a point when I decided that Valerie should feel even more humiliation. I started to cheat on her, but I did it in such a way that she knew it, but could not prove anything. I purposely left traces, hints, so that she could see what was going on but had neither the strength nor the ability to do anything about it. I could see her trying to cope, trying not to show her feelings. But her eyes spoke for her. Every time I came home late, with the slight smell of someone else's perfume on my shirt, she was nervous but silent. And that silence was the biggest victory for me. One day I asked her bluntly, Valerie, you know I'm cheating on you, right? She turned pale, but nodded. And what are you going to do about it? I added, knowing she didn't have an answer. She remained silent because she realized she was trapped and had no more way out. My revenge was complete. Valerie was no longer the woman who once thought she could control her life. She had lost everything, her friends, her career, her self-respect. Now she was just a shadow, living under the oppression of fear and addiction. And I savored every moment of that fall.